I'd like to take you through some of the reforms, but before we get into the reforms, I just want to give you a bit of background as to, I guess, how we got to this point. Real estate and property in fair trading's only been around a couple of years, and it was established primarily because industry, and in particular industry associations such as the EAC, were telling government that we're not happy with how real estate is being regulated in New South Wales. We're not happy with how real estate agents and real estate practitioners are viewed in New South Wales. If you did sorry, I'll keep walking in front of that, I'll just warn you now. If you polled, the most trusted people, real estate agents will sit somewhere around used car salesmen and politicians, and public servants aren't too far. Given the role of real estate agents and the increasing complexity and the role that they play in some of the most significant steps in people's lives, understandably, that sort of regard from the general public is not acceptable. In terms of how agents are operating, particularly given we've had a recent boom, maybe a continuing boom, who knows, we'll leave the economists to work that out. It was also viewed that perhaps now that things were a bit more complex, things were a bit more on the up, some people might have been coming into the industry a bit quicker than they should, and maybe not have the necessary skills and experience that were required to really do the job as the job should be done. So with those things on board, we started to go down the journey of, okay, what does a thriving professional industry look like? What is required from a regulatory perspective to develop that industry? Obviously, associations are already working to develop on the professionalism and that of their members, and that's why we're here today. But really they're asking us, what can we as the government do to help support that and help build the framework on which they can continue to build? So the real estate reforms, anybody read the paper? Nah. Oh, the lawyer up the back has. Essentially there are 40 reforms. What we're going to do today is we're going to crunch them down for you, tell you about what the key reforms are. A lot of them you've probably heard bits about. A lot of them you've probably got questions on. I'm happy to take questions as we go through. It's probably best to stick your hand up and give me a wave, because I think it's really important that you actually understand what the framework is and how this is going to impact on you. The reforms we're looking at bringing in probably mid next year, so we've got about a 12-month run up. So this is a really great opportunity to start to get prepared. Okay, the key reforms. These are the key changes, and I'm going to go through each one of these in a little bit more detail as we go through. Reduced licence categories. So we're streamlining the number of categories, and I'll show you that in a bit more detail. Improved qualification requirements. So this means that yes, people will need to do more work, more study in order to graduate through the industry. Improved CPD requirements. We know you love CPD, that's why you're here, and yes, you will be doing more CPD. We're going to look at restricting duties for certificate holders and licence holders, and I'll go through those in much more detail for you. And there will be greater responsibility for licensee in charge. I hear you say, but they already have a lot of responsibility. Yes, they do, but this defines it in a little bit more, and it also is that you will find through this that there is responsibility on everybody in the industry to contribute towards the increased standing and professionalism within the industry. Okay, so these are our current licence categories. So on your left are the categories that we have now. So we have a real estate agent, we have on-site residential property managers, buyers agents and business agents. These ones will actually collapse down and become a real estate agent category. For the on-site properties, buyers agents won't exist as is, they will be real estate agents. Business agents and on-site resident property managers will have like a conditional licence under this real estate category. Corporations licences. We've actually got there that it's no longer required. We've been doing a lot of work around that to try and remove the corporation licence. Primarily what we were trying to do is to reduce the need for you to have dual licences. So for many of you having operating businesses, you'll have your individual licence plus your company licence. We've actually just recently made the tough decision that this is probably a step too far at this stage, and it's probably going to add some complications that we don't need at this point in time. So corporation licence will actually continue. Strata managing agent, no change at all. Stock and station, no change at all. So as you can see, we'll have three primary categories: real estate, stock and station and strata. All clear? Any questions on that one? Okay. All right, certificate of registration. We have a situation at the moment in the industry where you can go and do your 4 units, you can get your certificate of registration, and you can go out and operate an agency on that, as long as you nominate an LIC. You can have a person who's done a 4 units and a person who's done a Cert 4, and they do exactly the same work. There's no distinction between them. What we're seeking to do here as a certificate of registration holder is we're actually making them almost like an apprentice. This is the training ground. Going forward, certificate of registrations, you may want to call them like an assistant agent, will be issued once and once only. You get it once and you'll get it for 4 years. And during that 4 years, you will be expected to continue your study to achieve your Cert 4 and become a licence holder. In order to really fulfil the role of an agent in today's market, you actually really need the experience and the study that comes from a Cert 4. Now, a lot of you will probably be sitting here thinking, oh, that's how it used to be. We're just back to where we were before. And yeah, agree, absolutely agree. We have taken this, turned this around to where it was some time ago. So the other thing for a certificate holder is to come into the industry, they will need 7 units instead of the 4. So it's just a little bit broader experience before they're actually, in a working real estate agency. Those 7 units are part of the Cert 4 anyway, so it's not, something you're doing on top of. If anyone's got a certificate of registration now, you automatically transition across. You don't need to do anything, but next time your certificate comes up for renewal, you will get a once only 4-year licence, and that's it. If you haven't progressed through and finished your certificate and done the experience that you need for the next level, your licence will just expire and you won't be able to get another certificate for at least 12 months. So it really is starting to push people through the system so that they continue their learning and experience. For our certificate holders, they won't be required to do CPD. And the reason they won't is because they're training and because they're already doing a Cert 4. We're working with industry and also with RTOs to make sure that people don't leave it to the last 3 months to try and get their Cert 4 and cram it in, because that's going to be a disaster. And there's obviously going to be a lot more people going through a Cert 4 process than there was before. In terms of duties, certificate of registration holders will not be able to bind parties to an agreement, so to a sales agreement or a property management agreement. They can still go out, they can still do the prospecting for customers, they can still sign people up for managing agency agreements or for sales agreements, but that will need to be countersigned by a licence holder. So there's a little bit of a quality control, and again it's about fostering that development within the industry. This is quite a different culture for the industry, and we understand that. You know, you're in an industry that by its very nature is highly competitive, and that's been the cut and thrust. And this is where I come back to the earlier statement that everybody actually now needs to contribute to the development and professionalisation of the industry. Any questions on certificate holders? Okay, next. Our licence holders. In order to apply for a licence going forward, you will need a certificate for, and you will need 12 months evidence of experience. We're working with the industry associations at the moment to try and develop what is that 12 months, how does that operate, what are the types of experience that people need during that time, how do we record that experience, do we develop a log, what sort of online capability can we bring to this so it's easier for people to keep these logs. So if you move between agencies, you don't lose all your history, that goes with you. So they're the sorts of inner workings that we're working on at the moment. If you currently hold a licence, under the new system you will simply transition across with that licence. There'll be no change, you don't need to do anything, you're there. We're also looking at lots of transitional applications, so if somebody in the industry has been out of the industry for a couple of years for some reason, we'll recognise their licence as an equivalent qualification. So we're not going to, so if you already have a licence, we'll continue to recognise that. We're also bringing in the 5-year licence option, so you only have to renew once every 5 years. CPD, that's, at the moment you're doing, you know, points for hours and you know, some of the CPD you have to sit around a table like this, some you can do a golf trip, some you can do all sorts of things. We're moving away from those, I guess, less learner focused ones to actually getting people trained in a whole range of issues. So you will be required to do 3 hours mandatory CPD. That mandatory CPD can only be delivered by a government agency, by an industry association, or by another organisation who's been approved by the Minister. The idea of this mandatory CPD is it really has a compliance focus. It's about where are things going wrong in the industry, where are our complaints coming from, what are we finding when we go out to agencies that may not be complied with. Has anything changed, any laws changed that affect agents? That's what the actual mandatory CPD will be based on. So that will be a 3-hour mandatory. If you hold a dual licence, you might be a strata manager and a real estate agent. You might be a stock and station agent, and a real estate agent. You'll only have to do one lot of CPD. We're not going to make you do, you know, doubles. Then there is also the 3-hour elective, so that's your more traditional CPD, your learning outcome-based CPD. And again, we're working with the industry associations to work out what that might look like and how that can work. If you're undertaking a diploma, we'll consider that your elective CPD component. No one will miss out on the mandatory. Everyone will have to be required to do that. Again, there is a restriction for licence holders, and that is licence holders cannot release trust funds. Funds from trust account can only be released by the licensee in charge, and we'll talk about that more under the licensee in charge. Any questions on licence holders? Yeah?
When does this all come into effect?
When does this come into effect? About mid next year. Yeah, that's the timetable we're working to at the moment. Okay, licensee in charge. Going forward, licensees will require a diploma and they will require 2 years experience. So you can see from, I just touched something I shouldn't. You can see that from entering into the industry to operating an agency is a minimum of 3 years, because you need at least 3 years experience. If you absolutely fast tracked it, that's as fast as you could go from entry to operating. The 2 years experience, again, it's evidence-based competencies of things you've done in the industry. At the moment, we don't have a licensee in charge class. You nominate a licensee in charge, but that's not another permit or another licence. It's just a nominated person. So this will be a new licence, which means that people will actually have to now apply to be a licensee in charge. So we're working on the transitional arrangements so that we can introduce this without impacting your business at all. And one of the things we've been looking at, for example, is that if you're currently a licence holder, you can apply to be a licensee in charge. We will recognise that. And we will allow you to do that before the laws come in, so you're all set and ready to roll. So in terms of the evidence of experience, we'll transition to that as well, because you can't get to, from next year we can't say to you, okay, where's your 12 months experience, when you go, I didn't know I had to have it, so I need to try and backtrack it. So we'll phase that in as well. Again, a 5-year licence option. Again, for the licensee in charge, they'll be doing the same mandatory that the licence holders will do. They'll be doing 3 hours elective, but they will also do 3 hours business base. This could be around HR, it could be around May will be the cut-off point, because May tends to be a bit of a quieter time of year for the industry. So for those who have to run and do their last minute 3 hours elective cramming, it's a little easier to do that. The other thing is that this holding of points and carrying them over and doing all that will not happen anymore. In terms of responsibilities, some kind of new responsibilities for licensee in charge. They will be responsible for the people who work for them to complete their CPD. In other words, if I don't complete my CPD, I'm a licence holder, I can get fined and my LIC can get fined. So the LIC has an ongoing obligation for training, for logs of experience, and that whole role. So again, it's much more of a putting back into the people who work for you kind of focus. Any questions on licensees in charge?
Who does the trust transactions when the licensee in charge of the holder?
I've got a section on trusts, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail, if that's all right.
Location-based?
Oh, thank you. That's the other thing, sorry, with licensee in charge. At the moment, it's very much focused on every premise, every geographical location must have a nominated licensee in charge, and their name is on the wall, and we're moving away from that. It's now you can work out what your business model is. You can determine how many LICs you need to run your particular business. So we're trying to be a bit more reflective of the reality of how business is actually operated. We are moving to an online world where things are quite different. So that need for a LIC at every place of business is no longer required. Sorry, not yet. Next year it'll be no longer required. Okay, some of the other changes. Sorry, so anything about the licensing framework and duties and... Yeah.
Just one second. Sorry. You said you don't need a licensee at every premises now.
Yep.
How happens if it's a company? They've got 2 or 3 offices. Still, one licensee under that company. Still the same rules?
You can determine how you want to do that. The way trust accounts are managed might help you, well, how you want to operate those will help you decide how you want to do that. But essentially, yes, you could be a company. You as the director might be the LIC, and you might have offices in, Shellharbour, Kiama and Wollongong. You make the decision as to whether you can do that as a single or whether you need to appoint additional licensees.
Okay, what about if you're signing agency agreements? You said that the licensee?
The licence holder.
So any licence holder can sign?
Any licence holder, yep.
So if something happens, the licensee gets in trouble plus the licence holder.
Yes.
Should the licensee in charge should be watching the book? That's what I...
Yeah, but I think...
Because anyone can be a licensee, there's going to be more of them.
In terms of the licensee having to countersign every contract, I don't think that's practical for most businesses. Yeah, and that's the feedback we get. That's just not a practical solution. And you can see that licence holders are also becoming mentors for the certificate of registration holders. So we'll see. Yep.
Sorry, with the harmonisation of business agents into real estate agents,
Yep.
how it applies to the discussion you had earlier in regard to pricing and what we can advertise now businesses for. Are all those rules going to be harmonised? For example, appraisal 10% range, marketing under our appraisal range and all that type of thing? Because I see
Yes,
some challenges in regard to how businesses are marketed compared to how real estate's marketed because of so many moving parts sometimes. So I'm happy to take it offline. I don't have to about how that might work.
Yep.
Because I don't know how that could 100% transfer to some of the things that happen in business space.
The business agents will still be a restricted licence under the real estate. So it's going to depend whether the business is also a real estate agent as well. So a full real estate agent. So yeah, happy to take it offline. Okay, some of the other changes outside of the framework. Oh, sorry, I should ask. Are we still happy to be considered used car salesmen and politicians, or I'm interested to get your feedback as to whether you think, oh my God, or yay? Yay? We had a yay. Any particular concerns? All right. Some of the other changes outside of the licensing and framework, trust accounts we'll talk about. Annual audits, some discipline powers to our disciplinary changes to our disciplinary powers, and material fact, the old chestnut material fact. Okay, separate trust accounts. At the moment, you generally have a trust account. Your rental payments, your sales deposits are held in that. There's no distinction between them, and there's no requirement on clearing those accounts out, apart from obviously on settlement of a particular sale. Going forward, you'll need to hold 2 trust accounts, one for sales, one for rental. And the reason for this is that the rental stuff, and the other thing is the rental one will be required to be cleared to as close to zero, less expenses that are committed at the end of each month. The reason for this is that this year's not been so bad. We've done about $500,000 in compensation claims. The year before that, we did $5.5 million in compensation claims for failure to account. The big ones generally are around, the large ones are generally around sales deposits, but the most frequent ones are around rental. Most of our claims come from rental and failure to account on rental payments. And what happens, of course, is that and as you would know, rental the amount of money coming through on the rental stock is quite significant now. It's quite massive, and it's only going to continue to grow. What happens with we find with landlords who do come and claim with us, that sometimes the failure of account could have happened 2 or 3 years previously, and because of the cyclical payments and things, they haven't actually identified it. So this allows landlords to much clearer manage their portfolio and reduce the opportunity for failure to account to go undetected for long periods of time, which is of course in the interest of the licensee as much as the landlord. In terms of releasing trust accounts and the licensee in charge's responsibility, what we find at the moment, inevitably when we go and investigate failure to accounts, we find that there are lots of people within the agency who actually have access to those accounts, who can actually take money from those accounts, and that's where the failure to account often happens. Obviously, yes, there are licensees who are sometimes the actual perpetrator, but quite often, invariably we often find, particularly in the rental space and that, it's gambling problems of staff who have access to accounts, and so the whole idea of a trust account is keeping it in trust, and that's why we're restricting who can actually release funds from the trust. So going forward, only the licensee in charge can release funds. You may have, again, you work out your business model as to how it suits you. You will still have your finance person within the office prepare everything, do the batches, do all those sorts of things, but it'll be the licensee in charge only who can push the button. The next question is, well, what if the licensee in charge isn't around? There will be facility to put in a stand-in licensee in charge, whether that's because the LIC is on holidays, or it could be through emergency situations where they've had a heart attack in the morning and or whatever. So that person could be another LIC within the business. It could even be your accountant, because it is only about the releasing of funds, so it could be your accountant. So they're the sorts of, I guess, measures that we're looking at. Any queries, concerns? Oh my God, how is it going to work? Yeah. Look, I know we do get a lot of, oh my God, how is that going to work? It is quite a shift in thinking. I suppose the only thing I can probably assure you at this stage is that we're working through that with EAC, with other industry associations, so that we're getting a practical application of this. But it is something that we do have to clamp down on, how many hands are in the trust account. It's something that we have to do going forward. We can't continue to sustain $5 million in claims each year. Is that a question? Hello.
At the moment, like with a trust account, we can have more
than one signatory on the trust account. So does that mean that only the licensee will be the signatory?
Yes, only the licensee can push go. You may have more than one licensee in charge in your business, but yeah. Okay, annual audits. We used to do annual audits where everybody had to provide an audit. Then we changed that a few years ago to you only need to lodge an audit if you have a qualified audit. That turned out to be a bit of a mistake on our part, because now what happens is that the people, when we don't get an audit from you, we don't know whether that's because it wasn't a qualified audit or it was and you just decided not to lodge it. So that it really isn't doing the job it was meant to do. We were trying to reduce burden, but it's really, it's allowing discrepancies to go undetected. So we're going to bring back the mandatory audit, whether it's qualified or not. But what we are doing is we're actually building an online audit portal so that your accountant does your audit, lodges it with us, it's done. So whilst we're sort of bringing the burden back up, we're trying to make it easier and less cumbersome for you. Okay, disciplinary powers. We're also looking at bringing in some stronger powers for us as a regulator, so that when things do go wrong, we can act quicker and a bit more decisively. At the moment, if we have a major investigation going on, or if we find out, and I'll tell you a true story, I kid you not, if we find that there's an issue, we actually have to issue what's called a show cause notice, which essentially means we write to you and we say there's this problem with you know, your solvency or whatever, and we think your licence should be cancelled. So you've got, I don't know, I think it's 14 days in which to write back to us and tell us why it shouldn't be. So, which sounds good and sounds like due process, but what we actually find, and I kid you not, I have actually written one of these, had to sign off one of these show cause notices, which was sent to a person in cell block B at Goulburn Jail, doing 6 years for fraud. Asking this person, why should we, you know, is there any reason why we shouldn't cancel your licence? You know, of course there's not. So this will actually allow, in certain circumstances, such as, you know, that type of situation, or where somebody's obtained their licence through false particulars, or somebody has, or we've made an error. We've granted a licence that we should have never granted. It allows us to cancel those without issuing those show cause notices. One of the other things that we'll be looking at is the power to suspend a licence. So if we do have a major investigation, we do have a major issue going on, we can actually suspend that licence so that we can limit the consumer harm that's happening while we're going through the court process or whatever is required. Well, in terms of these false particulars, one of our learning has been from another industry, the home building industry, where we've had a run of companies who will apply for a new licence. They'll get that in a new company name. Well, it's not the company, it's actually the directors who will apply for a licence in a new company name. And then as soon as that licence granted, they dissolve the original company. So they've already got their licence. So in the home building industry, that's actually become fairly prolific to us phoenixing. We don't have as big an issue with that in the real estate industry, but you know, it's a learning that we can prevent that happening. Okay, material fact. We've had many conversations around a table on material fact. Lots of conversations. I guess it's fair to say as industry are looking for very clear guidelines as to when do I have to disclose it and when do I not. I will leave Dave and Ted to explain to you when you should and when you're not. But in terms of the legislation, we're actually looking at to help make it a bit clearer. So, for example, there are, and you'll actually find that this will now fairly closely align with what we do under residential tenancies. and what the requirements are there. So if there's been any flooding or bushfires in the previous 5 years, if there's been a serious or violent crime in the preceding 5 years, if there are significant health or safety risks, and one of the ones that keeps popping up with a significant risk is actually meth labs, and yeah, go figure, because they actually pose a risk to the next person coming in. If it's listed on the Louisville Asbestos Insulation Register. And then the other material facts is whatever the buyer says to you is a material fact to them. So if a buyer discloses to you, and obviously the contracts will be amended to allow this to occur, the buyer says, I don't want a property, and I'm sorry, the only really bad example I've got is I have this terrible allergy to cats. I cannot buy a property that has had cats in it, and you're aware that it's had cats. You now need to disclose that. That then becomes a material fact. So we will never, as hard as we try, we will never make this so clear and crisp that you will never have to have a discussion with your boss or with your mate or with your industry association. That will never happen, but hopefully this is a step towards making some of those more common ones that come up a bit clearer. And that's all I have.